So, Kuru, I want to talk to you a little bit about statistics. I came across a show last weekend called Radiolab. That's a science show on NPR, and I was listening, and they were talking about I can't remember what I told you when I had it, but anyway, they were talking about the periodic table and how it was invented, and I thought our crew would be really interested in it. So I told him about it, and I looked it up online, and I found a show on stochasticity, which, if you don't know what stochasticity is, it is randomness. It's a statistical term for randomness. So I listened to it. It's an hour-long show, and I'll put a link to it in the sidebar. I'm facing this way. The sidebar is going to be that way. So I'll put a link to the Stochasticity show in the sidebar. And anyway, I listened to the show. I thought Kuru would be interested, and he and I listened to it and talked a lot about it. But it's really interesting because they talk about randomness and the role that randomness plays. Loud trucks here in Pendleton. They talked about the role that randomness plays actually, it's confusing because they're trying to do a popular show about randomness, and so they're talking about how streaks in basketball, for instance, and you get the hot guy and you say pass him the ball and he shoots, and when Kobe Bryant's on a roll and he's just hitting everything, and they say just get him the ball, and what they were saying in the show was that statistically there's no difference between the probability of making a shot whether you think you're on a streak or not. If you take a player's career average shooting percentage and try to predict their ability to hit a shot in a hot streak, that their career average is no better or no worse than what they're shooting in that hot streak. It's just a perceptual thing. And Kuru was, but the way they talk about it, they say the player is just like a coin. If you're flipping a coin, and you get streaks when you flip coins. So if you flip a coin 100 times, you expect to get the probabilities in favor of you getting a streak of like 7 in a row that are heads or something like that. And they say the same thing is true in basketball, where the number of hot streaks people get don't fall outside of the statistical expected value. Therefore, there's no skill involved. There's nothing. And Kuru was like, that's baloney because it's mechanistic. There's a mechanism. You're shooting the basketball. You're shooting in different positions. It depends on how you're being guarded. Blah 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 blah. There's all this stuff. And I told him when we were listening to this, I said, well, they understand that. The difference is that what all they're saying is that the outcome, the pattern that you get from the shots, falls within the expected distribution. They're not saying that there's a random chance of whether or not you're going to make or miss a shot. They're not saying that there's no cause, that randomness implies no cause. They're just saying they look at the statistical distribution of the outcome, and they say that distribution doesn't fall outside the expected distribution. Therefore, there's likely not a special cause making you a better shooter at that time. Well, then they get so I explained this to him, and we had a long conversation about it and about how you use statistics, and there's exploratory statistics versus confirmatory statistics, but statistics really just describes distribution of outcomes. That's all it does. It doesn't ascribe any causality. It doesn't do anything. So when you use confirmatory statistics, you say, I believe there's a process functioning here. For instance, I believe that there's a chemical plant here that's going to cause a higher degree of cancer in people living within 100 miles of that. And then you do a statistical test to see if the number of cancer cases is greater than expected in a random distribution. And if it is, then you say that confirms my hypothesis that it's this chemical plant causing that. That would be how you use confirmatory statistics. Well, then I got online on some morning this week, and I was looking up for this thing to send to somebody else, a friend of mine, and I found a podcast that they'd done as a follow-up to the original show. And the podcast is about 15-20 minutes long. And and they got a call back from one of the statisticians telling to correct them on some of the stuff they were saying. And it turns out, if you listen to the podcast, they say that they essentially say that randomness explains these behaviors. So in fact, they were saying what I told Crew they weren't saying. They were saying that randomness is, in essence, the cause of your shooting percentage, and that, that essentially they weren't ascribing, the mechanism. And so one of the guys says, well, actually, recently one of the statisticians says, actually, recently there was a study that showed that hitting streaks in baseball, like game-to-game hitting streaks, were non-random. That actually more recent games, how players did in more recent games, were more predictive of the player's ability to hit in the upcoming game than their entire batting average. So they said, so there must be something mental involved here, or something, something psychological or mental, or some preparation they're doing that's improving it. And I was like, I couldn't believe that they believed that that wasn't the case in the first place, because it's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense at all. Anyway, fascinating. I find this fascinating because, I did my master's thesis on point pattern distributions, and I think the problem is that they don't understand scale of analysis. And if you look at the scale at which you do your statistical tests in a linear, if you have lineal stuff and you got spatial autocorrelation or lineal autocorrelation, that the scale at which you conduct your analysis changes whether or not you find patterns, you find those correlations. So anyway, it's interesting. I had a conversation with my other friends who are geographers at work who do spatial statistics, and they agreed that it's a geography thing, and geographers are cool. Anyway, it's probably way more than you wanted to know about stochasticity, and this may not make any sense at all to you, but you can follow the link in the sidebar, and you can listen to the podcast if you've got time. It's like an hour and a half long between the show and the podcast, and enjoy. That's what I've been thinking about lately, so that's what I'm talking about.